Police officers play a crucial role in maintaining law and order in society. They are expected to enforce laws, protect citizens, prevent crime, and ensure that justice is served fairly. The profession itself is built on principles of integrity, responsibility, and public service. When individuals break the law, it is the duty of the police to apprehend them and ensure they are handed over to the judicial system for appropriate punishment. However, law enforcement officers are not supposed to act as executioners or impose their own judgments. Their role is to uphold justice without bias, cruelty, or personal vengeance. In an ideal world, police officers embody fairness, treating all individuals, including prisoners, with dignity and respect. Even those who have committed crimes deserve humane treatment under the law. This is a fundamental principle of human rights and justice. The legal system exists to determine guilt and assign punishment fairly, not to allow officers to act as punishers themselves. Unfortunately, history and real-life events have shown that this expectation is not always met. There have been countless cases where police officers have abused their power, particularly against vulnerable groups, including women prisoners. Women in prison often face a different set of challenges compared to male prisoners. Gender biases, societal prejudices, and systemic flaws in law enforcement sometimes lead to female inmates being treated more harshly. Instead of ensuring that prisoners serve their sentences under humane conditions, some officers use their authority to impose severe punishments, crossing the line between discipline and cruelty. Such actions not only violate the rights of the prisoners, but also undermine the very foundation of justice and fairness that the police force is meant to uphold. Severe punishments inflicted on women prisoners by officers can take many forms: physical violence, emotional abuse, isolation, or even denial of basic necessities. These punishments often go unnoticed or unreported due to fear of retaliation. Women prisoners may already be in vulnerable positions, having limited access to legal representation or external support. When police officers, the very people entrusted with upholding the law, become perpetrators of abuse, it creates a deep sense of injustice. The mistreatment of women prisoners is not just a moral and ethical failure, but also a violation of international human rights laws. Organizations around the world advocate for fair treatment of prisoners, emphasizing that all human beings, regardless of their crimes, should be treated with dignity. Justice should not be about cruelty or revenge. It should be about fairness, rehabilitation, and upholding the principles of law. Police officers must be held accountable for their actions, and strict measures should be in place to prevent the abuse of power. Proper training, oversight, and accountability mechanisms are necessary. Police officers and prison authorities are expected to enforce laws and maintain order while treating all individuals, including prisoners, with dignity and fairness. However, history has shown that some officers misuse their authority, engaging in acts of cruelty and injustice, particularly against vulnerable groups such as women prisoners. This abuse of power is not just a betrayal of public trust, but also a direct violation of human rights. Instead of upholding justice, these officers become perpetrators of violence, imposing severe punishments that go far beyond legal or ethical boundaries. One of the most common forms of power abuse in prisons is excessive physical punishment. Women prisoners have reported instances of being beaten, kicked, or subjected to unnecessary force for minor infractions or without cause. Some officers justify such actions by claiming they are maintaining discipline, but in reality, these punishments are often carried out in anger or as a demonstration of dominance. In extreme cases, prisoners have suffered severe injuries or even death due to such brutality. Unlike male prisoners, women are particularly vulnerable to this kind of treatment, as they are often perceived as weak and less likely to fight back. Beyond physical violence, psychological abuse is another form of power misuse that female prisoners endure. Some officers use intimidation tactics, threats, and verbal humiliation to break prisoners' spirits. Women may be subjected to degrading comments, forced isolation, or threats against their families. The constant fear of punishment creates an environment of terror, making it difficult for prisoners to report abuses or seek help. This kind of mistreatment can lead to long-term mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Another severe form of abuse is the denial of basic human necessities. In some cases, officers punish women prisoners by restricting their access to food, water, medical care, or hygiene products. Since female prisoners have specific health needs, such as menstrual hygiene and maternal care, the denial of these essentials can cause serious physical and emotional distress. There have been reports of women being forced to endure inhumane conditions, such as being locked in overcrowded, unsanitary cells for extended periods, simply because an officer decided they deserved harsher treatment. Sexual abuse is one of the gravest violations of power in prisons. Some officers take advantage of their authority to exploit women prisoners, using coercion, threats, or outright violence. In many cases, victims remain silent out of fear of retaliation, knowing that their complaints may be ignored or dismissed. This abuse not only destroys the dignity of the prisoners, but also reinforces a culture of impunity within the system, where officers feel untouchable despite their crimes. The abuse of power by police officers and prison authorities highlights the urgent need for reform. Oversight mechanisms, stricter laws, and independent investigations are necessary to prevent further injustices. Those in positions of authority must be held accountable to ensure that justice is served, not distorted. A fair legal system does not tolerate cruelty, and true justice must include the protection of even the most vulnerable individuals, including those behind bars. Throughout history and in modern times, numerous cases have emerged where women prisoners have faced severe and inhumane treatment at the hands of law enforcement officers. These cases highlight the dark reality of power abuse within the justice system, where women, often defenseless and voiceless, suffer brutal punishments. Some of these cases have gained international attention, exposing the urgent need for reform and accountability. 1. Abu Ghraib prison scandal, Iraq, early 2000s. Infamous cases of prisoner abuse occurred at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, where U.S. military personnel were found guilty of torturing and mistreating detainees, including women prisoners. Shocking photos and reports revealed that female detainees were subjected to sexual violence, beatings, and psychological humiliation. Some were stripped naked, threatened with rape, and forced into degrading positions while officers took photos and laughed. The scandal led to international outrage, resulting in several military personnel being court-martialed, but many believe justice was never fully served for the victims. The case of Kiran Yadav, India, 2013. Kiran Yadav, a female prisoner in India, was brutally beaten by police officers after she was arrested on minor charges. Witnesses reported that officers kicked and slapped her repeatedly, refusing her medical attention after the assault. She later died from internal injuries, but the case was initially dismissed as a natural death. It was only after human rights activists intervened that an investigation was launched. However, cases like Kiran's are not isolated in India, where reports of custodial violence against female prisoners are alarmingly frequent. Saidnaya Prison, Syria ongoing. Saidnaya Prison, run by the Syrian government, has been described by Amnesty International as a human slaughterhouse, where prisoners, including women, face unimaginable cruelty. Female detainees have been subjected to rape, starvation, and brutal beatings. Reports indicate that women prisoners are tortured into false confessions, forced to witness the execution of their fellow inmates, and denied medical care even when suffering from severe injuries. The lack of international intervention has allowed these abuses to continue for years with little accountability. The tragic death of Sandra Bland, USA, 2015. Sandra Bland, an African-American woman, was arrested in Texas for a minor traffic violation, but was found dead in her jail cell 3 days later. Authorities ruled it a suicide, but evidence of police misconduct raised serious doubts. Reports indicated that she was physically assaulted during her arrest, and her family and activists believe she was mistreated while in custody. Her death sparked national protests against police brutality, particularly the mistreatment of black women in the justice system, China's secret re-education camps, ongoing. In China's Xinjiang region, Thousands of Uyghur women have been detained in so-called re-education camps. Reports from survivors reveal horrific abuse, including forced sterilization, sexual violence, and extreme psychological torture. Women have described being electrocuted, beaten, and forced to take unknown drugs. These camps have faced international condemnation, but China continues to deny the allegations. These cases serve as chilling reminders of the brutal treatment women prisoners face worldwide. They highlight the need for stronger legal protections, independent investigations, and international accountability to prevent further human rights violations. Severe punishments inflicted on women prisoners by law enforcement officers leave lasting scars, both physically and mentally. While prisons are meant to serve as institutions for rehabilitation and justice, in many cases, they become places of extreme suffering where women endure brutal treatment that breaks them physically and emotionally. The abuse of power by police officers and prison authorities results in devastating consequences that persist long after the physical wounds have healed. Physical impact of severe punishments. The physical consequences of extreme punishments in prison can be life-threatening. Women prisoners who experience beatings, forced labor, or other forms of violence often suffer from chronic pain, broken bones, internal injuries, and even permanent disabilities. Many are denied medical attention, leading to untreated infections or complications that could have been prevented. Sexual violence, another horrific form of abuse in prisons, has severe physical consequences. Victims often suffer from injuries, sexually transmitted infections, STIs, unwanted pregnancies, and long-term reproductive health issues. Some women are forcibly sterilized or subjected to medical neglect, exacerbating their suffering. Malnutrition is also a common issue when women prisoners are deliberately deprived of food or water as punishment. This leads to weakness, immune system deficiencies, and a higher risk of diseases. Overcrowded, unsanitary prison conditions further contribute to the spread of infections, with prisoners often denied access to proper hygiene or medical care. Sleep deprivation and prolonged isolation, common punitive measures, have severe physical consequences as well. Women subjected to these punishments often experience headaches, weakened immune systems, cardiovascular problems, and a heightened risk of chronic illnesses. Psychological impact of severe punishments. Beyond physical harm, the psychological effects of such brutal treatment are often even more damaging. Women prisoners who suffer abuse frequently experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, depression, and severe anxiety. The constant fear of violence or retaliation creates an environment of terror, leaving victims in a state of emotional numbness or extreme distress. Verbal abuse, humiliation, and psychological manipulation further break down the mental resilience of women prisoners. Being treated as less than human strips individuals of their dignity, leading to feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. Many victims struggle with trust issues, paranoia, and emotional detachment, making reintegration into society difficult even after their release. Solitary confinement, often used as a form of punishment, has been proven to have devastating psychological effects. Women held in isolation for extended periods suffer from hallucinations, paranoia, and severe depression. Studies show that long-term isolation can lead to irreversible cognitive and emotional damage, sometimes pushing prisoners toward self-harm or suicide. The trauma inflicted in prison does not end with incarceration. Many women who survive such punishments continue to experience nightmares, panic attacks, and suicidal thoughts long after their release. The stigma of being a former prisoner, combined with the psychological damage they endured, makes rebuilding their lives incredibly difficult. Conclusion. The severe punishments inflicted on women prisoners leave deep physical and psychological wounds that often go unnoticed or unaddressed. Instead of rehabilitation, they experience cruelty that shatters their bodies and minds. This abuse highlights the urgent need for prison reform, stricter human rights enforcement, and accountability for those in power. True justice cannot exist in a system that allows such suffering to continue unchecked. The treatment of women prisoners in many parts of the world is a stark reminder of the deep flaws in our justice and prison systems. Instead of serving as institutions for rehabilitation and fair punishment, many prisons have become places of extreme suffering where women endure severe physical and psychological abuse. Police officers and prison authorities, who are meant to uphold justice, sometimes misuse their power, inflicting brutal punishments that violate fundamental human rights. This harsh reality calls for urgent reform, stronger accountability, and a renewed focus on the principles of justice and fairness. One of the most pressing issues is the lack of oversight and accountability for officers who abuse their power. Many cases of violence against women prisoners go unreported due to fear of retaliation or the failure of authorities to take complaints seriously. Even when reports do surface, investigations are often slow, biased, or completely dismissed. To address this, independent monitoring bodies should be established to investigate abuses within prisons. These bodies must have the power to hold perpetrators accountable and ensure that justice is served for victims. Legal reforms are also essential to protect women prisoners from mistreatment. Stronger laws and policies must be implemented to prevent the excessive use of force, sexual violence, and other inhumane punishments. Prison staff should undergo strict training on human rights, gender sensitivity, and ethical treatment of inmates. Countries must also adhere to international human rights standards, such as the United Nations Bangkok Rules, which specifically outline guidelines for the treatment of female prisoners. Another critical area that needs reform is the prison environment itself. Overcrowded and unsanitary conditions contribute to the suffering of inmates, making it easier for abuses to occur. Governments must invest in better prison infrastructure, ensuring that women prisoners have access to adequate health care, hygiene, and nutrition. Solitary confinement, prolonged isolation, and other forms of extreme punishment should be strictly regulated or abolished, as they cause long-term psychological harm. Rehabilitation should be the main goal of the prison system, not cruelty or retribution. Women prisoners, like all inmates, deserve a chance to reintegrate into society after serving their sentences. This means providing proper education, vocational training, and mental health support to help them rebuild their lives. Many women who end up in prison are victims of poverty, domestic violence, or systemic injustices, and their punishment should not further strip them of their dignity or future opportunities. Public awareness and activism are also crucial in bringing about change. Human rights organizations, legal advocacy groups, and concerned citizens must continue to expose abuses, demand justice, and pressure governments to take action. Media coverage and social movements have proven to be powerful tools in holding authorities accountable and pushing for necessary reforms. Final thought: justice is not just about punishing criminals, it is about ensuring fairness, dignity, and human rights for all individuals, including those behind bars. A society that allows police officers and prison authorities to torture and mistreat prisoners is one that fails to uphold true justice. Change is necessary, and it starts with holding abusers accountable, reforming prison policies, and ensuring that no prisoner, especially vulnerable women, suffers from cruelty in a system meant to uphold the law.